Assalamu alaikum guys, this is your teacher Dr. Noor Muhammad and you are watching AS level biology recorded lecture series, and this is going to be the lecture of second week, and Alhamdulillah we have covered almost a very important part of the chapter topic cell, and if you can recall, I am talking about the cell membrane. From the previous lectures, previous one or two lectures, we are discussing cell membrane, and in the last lecture I have shown you the exact diagrammatic arrangement along with some video presentations that clearly gives you an idea of how cell membrane is made up of and how things are arranged in particular with the cell membrane. So that was the discussion of previous two lectures. Today, as I've told you in the previous lecture, that we are going to talk particularly about protein and the functions of cell membrane, because cell membrane has a lot of things जो कि अभी हमने डिस्कस करनी है. As I've told you कि पूरा एक चैप्टर है सेल मेम्ब्रेन के ऊपर. तो आज हम जो है बात जो शुरू कर रहे हैं वो फंक्शंस ऑफ सेल मेम्ब्रेन पे कर रहे हैं, और उसी से मैं प्रोटीन और लिपिड बाइलेयर को दोबारा से रिलेट करूंगा. तो हमारे पास आज हम जो डिस्कस कर रहे हैं वो टॉपिक है फंक्शंस ऑफ सेल मेम्ब्रेन. Okay, beta, when we talk about the function of cell membrane, the first and the most important aspect that is discussed always in much more detail than your imagination is the fact that cell membrane is involved, and it is responsible for the transport across the cell. I have told you when we started this topic that it's not possible for any substance to come in or go out of the cell. It is not possible for any substance to come in or go out of the cell without passing through cell membrane or bisecting this or overpassing the cell membrane. It's not possible. So it means the cell membrane has to play a very very important role whenever substances have to pass through it. ठीक है ना? तो अब जो cell membrane किस तरह की ट्रांसपोर्ट में इन्वॉल्व होती है, आज हम उसकी बात करेंगे. यू हैव टॉक अ बिट अबाउट दिस इन योर ओ लेवल्स आल्सो, एंड वी विल फर्स्ट रिवाइज ऑल दैट स्टफ एंड देन आई विल कनेक्ट एवरीथिंग टू द स्ट्रक्चर आई हैव टोल्ड यू इन द प्रीवियस लेक्चर. सो लेट्स बिगिन. ट्रांसपोर्ट अक्रॉस द सेल की जब हम बात करते हैं, सो वी ऑल नो फ्रॉम आवर ओ लेवल्स दैट ट्रांसपोर्ट अक्रॉस द सेल इज ऑफ टू टाइप्स. ठीक है, एंड इफ यू रिमेंबर, तो आप रिकॉल कर लोगे कि आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट एंड एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट. ट्रांसपोर्ट अक्रॉस द सेल, जिसमें हम कह रहे हैं कि सेल मेम्ब्रेन हैज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल टू प्ले, दैट ट्रांसपोर्ट इज ऑलवेज ऑफ टू टाइप्स. देयर आर टू वेराइटीज ऑफ दैट ट्रांसपोर्ट, पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट एंड एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट, एंड दिस हैज बीन टॉट टू यू गाइज इन योर ओ लेवल्स. ठीक है, तो जस्ट क्विकली मैं ऐसा करता हूँ कि इनके दरमियान आपको कुछ कंपैरिजन ही बता देता हूँ. ठीक है, जस्ट क्विकली. सो व्हाट इज पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट? इट इज अ ट्रांसपोर्ट So it is a transport from, oh no, it is the movement of substance from higher to lower concentration. It is a movement of substance from higher to lower concentration. जब भी कोई चीज़ ज़्यादा से कम की तरफ जाती है, जब भी किसी सब्सटेंस की मूवमेंट ज़्यादा से कम की तरफ होती है, दिस टाइप ऑफ मूवमेंट और ट्रांसपोर्ट इज कॉल्ड पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट. तो सेल मेम्ब्रेन इज इन्वॉल्व इन पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट, यानी सब्सटेंसेज मूव फ्रॉम हायर टू लोअर concentration, फ्रॉम इन टू आउट और आउट टू इन, or from outside to inside by passive movement in the cell. Whereas what is active transport? It is the movement of substance from lower to higher concentration. It is a movement of substance. It was the movement of substance from higher to lower, and it is the movement जो कि lower to higher है. So the only difference here is of this thing. The substance in active transport tends to move from the region where they are in lower concentration to a region where they are in higher concentration, and that this type of transport also occurs through cell membrane. Cell membrane is also involved in this type of transport. Taking another difference between these two kinds of transport is that this type of transport do not use energy or ATP, whereas uses energy from ATP, the molecule, energy carrier, adenosine triphosphate. So usually the passive transport does not require any energy involvement. Without energy, it's quite a natural process. Substances naturally move कर सकते हैं from higher to lower concentration. That is why this process does not require any kind of energy or ATP hydrolysis. Or I think I should make it more chemical. Na? They do not use they do not use energy or ATP hydrolysis. ATP is not hydrolyzed during any kind of passive transport. ATP hydrolysis means ATP breakdown. ठीक है? Whereas these use energy from ATP by hydrolyzing it. Again, the same point here. ये वाले जो हैं एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट में हम क्या देखते हैं कि एनर्जी यूज होती है, एटीपी हाइड्रोलाइज होता है. अच्छा, यहाँ पर जो टाइप्स है वो क्या है पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट में? पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट इज ऑफ 3 टाइप्स. नंबर 1 डिफ्यूजन, नंबर 2 ऑस्मोसिस, एंड नंबर 3 जो कि आपने ओ लेवल्स में नहीं पढ़ा हुआ, दैट इज इन योर ए लेवल्स, फैसिलिटेटेड डिफ्यूजन. Facilitated diffusion. So passive transport is of 3 types: diffusion, osmosis and facilitated diffusion. Diffusion, osmosis and facilitated diffusion, ये 3 तरह की पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट हमारे पास होती है. जबकि जब एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट की हम बात करते हैं तो एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट भी हमारे पास 3 तरह की है. एक, लेट्स टॉक अबाउट इट. Through carrier protein, second is endocytosis. Yeah, I should write it. चलो, endocytosis, and exocytosis. So एक्टिव ट्रांसपोर्ट भी 3 तरह से हो रही है और पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट भी. देयर आर 3 डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ वेज ऑफ डूइंग पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट. ठीक है, दोनों में 3 तरह के methods हैं. अब individually we'll be talking about diffusion, osmosis and facilitated diffusion, and then we'll talk about carrier protein, active transport through carrier protein, active transport through endocytosis and active transport through exocytosis. So inshallah just quickly note these points and then I'll talk about these 3 modes of transport in passive section and these 3 modes of transport in active section. Okay guys, you must have noted down the points. So now let's begin the discussion on passive transport. अब हम बात करेंगे passive transport के बारे में. Okay guys, I have told you already that passive transport occurs by three modes or modes. Number one is diffusion. Number two is osmosis, and number three is FD. What is FD here? Facilitated diffusion. Number one is diffusion, number two is osmosis, and number three is facilitated diffusion. So these are the three different kinds of modes of passive ट्रांसपोर्ट. ठीक है, मैंने इनको इसलिए ऐसे लिख दिया है ताकि हम इनको कंपेयर करके डिस्कस कर लें, कंपैरेटिव तरीके से हमारे पास डिस्कशन आ जाए. तो लेट्स कंपेयर देम. ठीक है जी, इसको हम कंपेयर करते हैं. सो डिफ्यूजन को जब हम डिफाइन करते हैं मेरे बच्चे, डिफ्यूजन को व्हेन वी डिफाइन डिफ्यूजन, सो हाउ वी डिफाइन डिफ्यूजन? It is simply movement of substance, particularly gases, from high to low concentration. So it is the movement of substances, particularly gases, from higher to lower region or concentration. ठीक है? Whereas osmosis is particularly the movement of water from higher to lower concentration. ठीक है, यहां पर it is facilitated diffusion, तो it is movement, or I should define it, diffusion facilitated by a carrier protein. ठीक है, it's facilitate. I'll show you in diagrams as well, and I'll show you the video presentation showing all these processes in a 3D जो है ना वो उसके फॉर्म में, and वो आपका बहुत ही बेहतरीन सा कॉन्सेप्ट जो है ना उससे बन जाएगा. But for now just remember that facilitated diffusion and diffusion are almost same. The only difference is that in facilitated diffusion there is an involvement, that diffusion is particularly facilitated, ठीक है जी. So that's the first thing you need to, and it is particularly used for the water. अच्छा, फिर let's talk about the second point, that is involvement of semi permeable membrane. कि क्या particularly membrane involve होगी? नहीं होगी, या होगी देखते हैं. No, I'll show you in diagram, जिस points आप लिख लें. No semi permeable membrane is involved, जबकि यहां पर भी all know that semi permeable membrane is involved, and यहां पर भी no semi permeable membrane is involved. फिर the third point, no ATP, hydrolyze, same for it, because all of them are the type of passive transport, no? So no ATP is hydrolyzed, no ATP is hydrolyzed, and no ATP is hydrolyzed. None of them requires energy. None of them requires energy. ठीक है जी. फिर the next point is no carrier protein is involved. किसी किस्म का कैरियर प्रोटीन यहां पर इन्वॉल्व नहीं होता है. यहां पर भी नो कैरियर प्रोटीन is involved. हम यहां देखते हैं यहां भी किसी भी टाइप का कैरियर प्रोटीन इन्वॉल्व नहीं होता है. Whereas this is the diffusion by carrier protein, so therefore we say that carrier protein is always involved. So beta, these are some basic comparative points between these three types of passive transport: diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. You all have gone through diffusion and osmosis already in your O levels, but you must not have done the osmosis वाले facilitated diffusion वाली part. ये आपने अपने O levels में नहीं किया हुआ होता है. So just to give the theoretical points, I have given you these points, and I know कि आपको still uncertainty होगी, and to just get rid of that uncertainty कि how these processes are occurring in cell membrane, I am now going to show you a video presentation that will explain you clearly how different types of passive transports are taking place, and you will get a very accurate idea that how these three processes are occurring in the cell. So let's watch the video presentation now, and then we'll proceed.
Okay, so in this video we're going to go over what is called passive transport. Now here's a little example that I'm sure you've all noticed. Here we have a beaker of water, and let's say we add 1, 2, 3 drops of red food coloring. Notice how the red food coloring, give it time, give it a few minutes, will eventually spread over the entire container, and you don't even have to stir up the container, but eventually the entire liquid will be red. Well, that's a great example of something called diffusion, which is a type of passive transport. Let's go ahead and discuss this in more detail. So when we look at the definition of passive transport, it's pretty straightforward. It's how cells move molecules without spending any of their energy. And in the world of cells, energy is a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. You'll often hear ATP kind of compared to as money of a cell. You know, when you have money, you want to spend your money carefully. When cells have ATP energy, they want to spend their ATP carefully. So they don't want to be careless with how they spend their ATP. And so cells would love to move molecules around without having to spend any of their ATP energy. Well, this is what we call passive transport. It's how cells move molecules without spending ATP. In my animation here, by the way, I have a kayaker. Ask yourself, does this kayaker need to spend any of his energy in order to move? You can see that the black lines are showing the current of this river. I hope you know the answer is no. The kayaker can just sit there and let the current of the river take the kayaker downstream. That kayaker didn't need to spend any energy. And so when we look at passive transport, again, we're going to show you it's how molecules move from a high concentration to a low concentration. And this process requires no energy. By high concentration, we mean where the molecules are most abundant or most plentiful. In this picture right here, you can see the yellow dots are representing molecules, and they're most abundant in the lower left-hand corner. But as we go through this animation, the yellow dots are beginning to spread out, and now they're fully spread out over the entire size of this container. This is what we mean by molecules moving from a high to a low concentration. We kind of say it's like they move down their concentration gradient. So they start high and they move down to a low concentration. Examples of passive transport, and that's what the rest of this video is going to discuss, are diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. So let's go into diffusion first. Okay, when we look at diffusion, again, we have a simple definition here. It's the movement of molecules from an area of high to low concentration. And as we said a moment ago, it's an example of passive transport, so no energy is required. The movement of these molecules is going to continue until there's an equilibrium, a state of balance. And so in my picture up here, we can see that the yellow dots are all clumped and concentrated at the left of the picture. And over on the right side of the picture, there's a couple yellow dots, but you can see that they're less concentrated. So molecules are going to spread out and move until there's a balance. This is called diffusion. And diffusion is really how molecules move into and out of most cells, and it's something we're going to discuss in a little more detail. So right here we have a cell surrounded by oxygen, and my question in O2 is oxygen. My question in the middle is, will oxygen mostly enter or will oxygen mostly exit the cell? Well, find the high concentration. I hope you can see the high concentrations on the outside of the cell. And so by diffusion moving from high to low, oxygen's going to move from the outside to the inside. Notice how a couple oxygens exited the cell, but the vast majority entered the cell. And now there's a nice balance. We have that state called equilibrium. Well, here's a neat little animation here about us breathing. Here we have a lady doing yoga, and she's inhaling a big breath of O2, which is oxygen. Let's follow that oxygen into her lungs. When we zoom on into her lungs, we can see that the oxygen, the O2, has spread to all those branches inside of her lungs. So when we zoom on in even more to her lungs, we know that, you might know that the tips of your lungs, those branches, the tips of the branches inside of your lungs have these little air sacs in them called the alveoli. And so in this animation here, here's an air sac that's just filled up with O2. And my question is, where is the high oxygen concentration and where is the low oxygen concentration? I hope you can see the high oxygen concentration is in the alveoli and the low oxygen concentration is in the bloodstream. So due to diffusion, oxygen will simply move from a high to a low concentration. So now that there's oxygen in the bloodstream, how does that oxygen get spread around the body? Our heart will now, because our heart is constantly pumping and beating, our heart will pump our blood, which is now full of oxygen, around this woman's body. So there goes the oxygen. It's being pumped around her body. And when we follow that oxygen, here's the oxygen that she just inhaled. And if I were to ask you, okay, find cell X at the bottom of the picture. Cell X is a cell just like every other cell. It needs oxygen. Notice how cell X is not in direct contact with the blood flow, with the bloodstream. So how the heck does cell X get oxygen? Well, the simple answer for how cell X gets oxygen is if we remember what diffusion is. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from a high to a low concentration. Ask yourself, where is the high oxygen concentration? And ask yourself, where is the low oxygen? Well, the high oxygen concentration is in the blood. The low oxygen is in cell X and all the other cells. And so simply by diffusion, molecules are going to move from a high concentration, the blood flow, to a low concentration, the cells. So cell X and all the other cells get their oxygen through the process of diffusion. Well, this reverse process is true with carbon dioxide. Over time, your cells create carbon dioxide as a waste gas. It builds up in cells, and too much is fatal. It needs to be removed. So as our cells work to remove carbon dioxide, ask yourself, where is the high carbon dioxide concentration? And where is the low carbon dioxide concentration? I hope you see the high carbon dioxide concentration is in the cells. The low carbon dioxide concentration is in the blood. So carbon dioxide is simply going to diffuse from the cells into the blood. And once the carbon dioxide's in the blood, don't forget your heart is still pumping. And so your heart is still pumping blood, and now in this case, our blood is full of carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide-rich blood is going to go back to the lungs. So let's go back to the lungs and follow this process to the end. When we come back to the lungs, again, there's our air sac called the alveoli, and here we have our heart pumping carbon dioxide back to the lungs. And my question is, where is the high carbon dioxide concentration? I hope you see it's in the blood. And so carbon dioxide is simply going to diffuse from a high concentration in the blood to a low concentration in the alveoli. And now that CO2 is back in the lungs, we simply begin the exhale. So the woman begins to exhale. You also have a muscle underneath your ribs, or underneath your lungs and between your ribs, called your diaphragm. That helps to push out some of the carbon dioxide. And so I mentioned a moment ago that the diaphragm is a muscle that helps push out some of the CO2 from the lungs. And now we're back to where we started. This woman who's doing yoga and is breathing heavily, she just exhaled a bunch of carbon dioxide, and the process will simply repeat with every breath. Well, let's turn directions and focus on another type of passive transport called osmosis. Osmosis is the same thing as diffusion. Don't mix the two up. They really are the same thing. The big difference is that osmosis implies water. Osmosis implies the diffusion of water from a high concentration to a low concentration. And so in this animation here, pretend that we have a container of distilled water. And if you're not sure what distilled water is, it's 100% pure water. There are no solutes in it. It's as pure as water can reasonably be. It's also something that doesn't exist naturally on Earth. There's no rivers of distilled water. There's no lakes. It doesn't rain distilled water. Distilled water is created basically in a chemistry lab. Well, so here we have a cell placed in a container of 100% pure water. There's nothing in this water other than water. And this is an example of what is called a hypotonic environment. When cells are placed in a hypotonic environment, ask yourself, where is the high water concentration? I hope you see it's on the outside of the cell. And so the high water concentration is on the outside of the cell, and osmosis is movement of water from high to low concentration. So in this case, water will move from the water into the cell, and the cell will swell up and get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it very well could even burst. It's not necessarily going to burst, but if it swells too much, it very well might. Well, and another, the kind of the opposite of this is salt water. Salt water is high in solutes, namely salt. And so in this picture here, we have a cell filled with water, but notice the water inside of the cell is fairly pure. But the water outside of the cell has a bunch of S's. The S's stand for salt. Remember, this is salt water. So when you look at this picture, this is an example of what is called a hypertonic environment. And in this case, the high water concentration is in the cell. There might be more individual water molecules outside of the cell if you were to actually count them up. But the fact that the water on the outside is mixed with salt makes the water on the outside less pure. And so water moves from a high concentration to a low, so water will move from the cell to the outside. The cell very well might even shrivel and become dehydrated. So these are examples of, this is an example of a hypertonic environment and how cells react to them. So there's a quick little lab activity. Let's say here's a potato slice that's placed in the inside of a dish, a container of salt water, and here's another potato slice in a container of distilled water. Well, after 30 minutes, let's say you were to weigh them before and after, and the potato slice lost weight in the salt water container, but in the distilled water after 30 minutes, the potato slice got heavier, it gained weight. So if we were in class, I would have you pause and try to answer these questions with your neighbors. So if you're watching this video, pause the video. I'm going to go over these answers in 3, 2, 1. So let's look at the salt water potato first. Where is the high concentration experiment? Well, so where is the high concentration in the saltwater experiment? Well, if you know that it lost weight, well, that's because it lost water. And so in my animation, you can see that water again moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. So water must be exiting this potato slice. And so once you identify this and examine this animation, it's pretty straightforward. There's a high water concentration in the potato. There's a low water concentration in the solution outside, in the water outside the potato. When we look at the other side, we can see that the distilled potato, the water put in distilled water, got heavier. The reason it got heavier is because it absorbed water. And so if we know that water went into it, that means the high concentration was on the outside of the potato and the low concentration was on the inside. And water moves from high to low, and that's why it got heavier. And so that answers question 1, 2, and 3. Well, here's a couple more to ponder. Again, if we were in class, I'd give you some time to work on this with your neighbor. Pause the video. I'm going to go over these answers in 3, 2, 1. So why did the saltwater potato lose weight? You know, try to avoid answers like, oh, it lost weight because it got dehydrated. That's true. The potato slice did become dehydrated, but why? And so this is what we mean by, be thorough with your answers. Water diffused out of the potato. Water moved from a high concentration inside the potato to a low concentration outside the potato. For number 6, why did the distilled water potato gain weight? Try to avoid answers like, it gained weight because it absorbed water. That's true, it did absorb water, but why? It absorbed water because, again, there was a high concentration of water outside the potato, a low concentration inside, so water diffused into the potato. So let's wrap up this video here. Facilitated diffusion is our final type of passive transport I want to mention. And so remember that in the animation right now, you can see that these blue dots are representing like oxygen and carbon dioxide, and small molecules like this are able to pass directly through the cell membrane. And that's what you see happening right here. Now, the topic we're looking at right now is called facilitated diffusion. Now, the word facilitate simply means to help. And so what we're going to show you is that sometimes diffusion needs a little help. In facilitated diffusion, larger molecules are going to enter and exit with the help. Remember, facilitate means help. So larger molecules are going to enter and exit with the help of what's called a protein channel located within the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Watch this. Glucose is just too big of a molecule to pass directly through the cell membrane. However, because of the protein channels that are embedded throughout the cell membrane, glucose molecules can pass through from the outside to the inside of the cell, and no energy is required. And again, this is what we mean by passive transport. No ATP energy is required for this to happen. And so one more time, here comes a glucose molecule passing through the protein channel. And so these protein channels help larger molecules go through diffusion, and that's why it's called facilitated diffusion.